The rain fell in a thin, silvery veil over Ravensshire estate, soft enough not to disturb the lantern flames, yet heavy enough to blur the last of the departing carriages. Lady Eleanor Hawthorne stepped through the threshold of her new home with a composed face, though her pulse beat hard enough to shake the fragile embroidery of her gloves. The night should have been one of trembling joy, or at least one of gentle anticipation, yet the silence that greeted her carried a different weight, something colder, more watchful. Servants bowed, but their eyes followed her with a kind of hushed curiosity society rarely bothered to conceal. The Duke of Ravensshire had married again, and already the whispers stretched across England like smoke. Eleanor moved through the grand foyer, her footsteps echoing against polished marble. She felt the air shift as the butler guided her toward the east wing, and she sensed she was being ushered into a life shaped by centuries of rigid custom. Portraits lined the walls, their oil-painted eyes fixed in perpetual judgment, unsmiling men in military coats, austere women in jewel-toned gowns, each face reflecting the unyielding lineage she was meant to uphold. She lifted her chin with quiet resolve, determined not to show uncertainty, but her nerves tightened with every step. She had been raised to carry dignity like a second skin, yet nothing in her upbringing prepared her for the man she now called husband. The Duke had barely spoken to her since the ceremony earlier that morning. He had offered his arm with impeccable courtesy, danced with her once as duty required, and endured the congratulations of nobles who watched him with expectant curiosity. But there had been no warmth in his gaze, no flicker of the affection that should accompany a union blessed by God and witnessed by the aristocracy. Eleanor could not decide whether his indifference was meant as a warning or a shield. The butler stopped before a pair of carved oak doors and bowed deeply. "Your Grace, the Duke awaits within." Her breath trembled for the briefest moment before she steadied herself. "Thank you," she replied. She touched the polished brass handle, exhaled once, and entered. The room glowed with firelight, shadows dancing across shelves of leather-bound volumes, and the dark red curtains drawn tight against the storm outside. The Duke of Ravensshire stood before the hearth, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Even in stillness, he possessed the bearing of a man shaped by duty, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, and bound by an invisible armor forged long before she entered his life. His profile, caught in the flicker of flame, looked carved from both strength and sorrow. Eleanor closed the door softly and approached with measured grace. She had imagined this moment many times in her youth, the bridal night when a husband might speak words of comfort, might offer a kiss signaling the beginning of partnership. Yet the silence stretching between them suggested no such tenderness. Still, she lifted her chin, determined to honor her role. "My lord," she said quietly, "I trust one have not kept you waiting." He turned his head slightly, acknowledging her with a polite inclination. "No. You are punctual." His voice was deep but distant, as though every syllable was weighed before spoken. She folded her hands before her, battling the faint ache that rose from his mild, detached tone. "This day marks the start of a new chapter for us both," she offered, trying to bridge the vast distance between them. The Duke exhaled, a slow and deliberate breath. "A chapter, yes. One that must be navigated with clarity rather than sentiment." He stepped closer, though not near enough to touch. His gaze, cool and steady, rested upon her with restrained intensity. "Before we proceed any further, I must speak plainly." Eleanor's heart tightened at the gravity in his voice. "Of course, Your Grace." He looked briefly toward the fire, as if gathering the courage to reveal a truth he wished he could keep buried. When he faced her fully, the flames reflected in his troubled eyes. "Lady Eleanor, I do not wish to deceive you, nor allow you to harbor expectations that cannot be met." His tone softened, but only with weariness. "I feel no love, no longing for you." The blow was silent yet devastating. Eleanor remained motionless, the words sinking into her like cold rain. She had braced herself for formality, for restraint, even for delayed affection, but not for this stark confession spoken before their life together had even begun. Still she held her composure, though her hands trembled where he could not see. "I appreciate your honesty," she managed, though her voice carried a faint quiver she despised. "Marriage built on truth stands firmer than one built on illusions." A flicker of something, regret perhaps, passed through his expression before he masked it again. It is not your fault. The fault lies in circumstance, in forces that neither of us chose. His careful wording only deepened the sting. She felt suddenly small within the vast chamber, a guest rather than a wife. But pride steadied her, and she summoned a dignity that did not falter even under heartbreak. "Then I shall endeavor to conduct myself in a manner worthy of the role I have entered," she said. "Whatever your sentiments may be, I intend to fulfill my duty with grace." He studied her for a long, heavy moment, as though reassessing the woman he had assumed would be fragile beneath the weight of his rejection. Perhaps he had expected tears or pleading. Instead, she offered only poise, a quiet strength that unsettled something deep within him. "I believe you will," he said at last, his voice softer. But he made no move toward her. No reassurance. No gesture of tenderness. The fire crackled between them, casting warm light upon a marriage already shadowed by coldness. Eleanor bowed her head slightly. "Shall I retire to my chambers, Your Grace?" "Yes," he replied. "Rest well. Tomorrow will require composure." She turned to leave, each step an act of will. When she reached the door, she paused only a heartbeat, hoping, foolishly, that he might call after her, might retract even a fragment of his confession. But the room remained silent. She stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her. The weight of his words pressed heavily upon her chest, yet beneath the hurt a faint ember of resolve began to burn. She would not be defeated by indifference. If she must live in this house of ghosts and silence, she would do so with dignity. And though the night ended in heartbreak, it left a question lingering in the quiet corridors. Had the Duke spoken with certainty or fear? The following morning unfolded beneath a pale winter sun, its light casting a faint sheen across the frost-tipped lawns of Ravensshire estate. Eleanor stood before her chamber window, her fingers loosely clasped as she observed the grounds that were now, by marriage, her responsibility. The Duke's confession from the previous night still echoed within her like an unwelcome ghost, quiet yet persistent. But she refused to let it define her. If she was to inhabit this imposing world, she must first understand it. And so, with steady resolve, she descended the grand staircase to begin her life as Duchess. The household stirred with a controlled elegance, servants moving with disciplined precision. Eleanor greeted each with gentle politeness, though she sensed their cautious curiosity. News traveled swiftly within such halls, and it was impossible to ignore the subtle glances that suggested they already knew more about her husband's disposition than she did. Yet she refused to shrink beneath their scrutiny. She lifted her chin and allowed her presence to settle into the estate as though she had always belonged. After breakfast, she found herself escorted by Mrs. Penfold, the long-serving housekeeper whose manner balanced between stern loyalty and polite formality. "It is customary, Your Grace, for the Duchess to familiarize herself with the estate's charitable obligations," she explained. His Grace's late fiancé oversaw several of them. The mention struck Eleanor with a soft, unexpected sting. She knew of the woman only through whispered society gossip, the tragic tale of a young lady who had captured the Duke's heart before illness took her too soon. The story had always sounded like fiction, the sort sung in drawing rooms, yet here it felt brutally real, another shadow lingering in the halls Eleanor must traverse. "I should like to see everything," Eleanor replied with measured calm. "It is my wish to honor the duties entrusted to me." Mrs. Penfold gave a small nod, perhaps surprised by her earnestness, and led her toward the conservatory. They walked along the gallery corridor, sunlight filtering through tall windows, illuminating the dust motes that floated like tiny dancers in the air. Eleanor paused briefly before a portrait of the late fiancé, an elegant young woman with gentle eyes, captured in the delicate softness of youth. Though the painting was modest, it held a reverence that struck Eleanor with an unexpected ache. She wondered how such a woman had lived, what warmth she had shared, and why grief could cling to a man with such unrelenting strength. As Eleanor moved on, she noticed something out of place, a small bouquet resting on a table beneath the portrait. The flowers were fresh, winter blossoms carefully arranged. Someone still placed them there. Someone still remembered. Eleanor continued walking, though a quiet heaviness settled in her chest. She did not envy the dead, nor did she resent the man who mourned her. But she understood, more clearly than ever, that she had stepped into a life where affection was not merely absent, it was guarded behind walls built from loss. In the conservatory, warm with filtered sunlight and the sweet scent of lemon leaves, Eleanor found a moment of solace. The glass panes enclosed her like a sanctuary, and she inhaled the delicate fragrance of hothouse blooms. Here, perhaps, she could carve a piece of belonging. She touched a petal with gentle familiarity, her mind already forming plans to revive the neglected corners of the estate's botanical collection. Her quiet exploration was interrupted by the sound of boots on tile. She turned to see the Duke standing at the entrance. He looked almost surprised to find her there, though he masked it quickly. "You are awake early," he remarked. "I wish to acquaint myself with the estate," she replied. "There is much to learn." For a moment, something softened in his gaze. Approval, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of respect. "You need not shoulder every responsibility at once." "I would rather begin than avoid," she said, her tone steady but gentle. He studied her with an unreadable expression, then stepped further inside. The air between them carried a fragile tension, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply uncertain. He glanced at the lemon trees, their fruit glowing like pale gold. "My mother planted these," he said quietly. "She found comfort here." "How did she describe it?" Eleanor asked, curious. He hesitated, the faintest shift of vulnerability rippling through his guarded composure. "As a place where one might breathe without expectation." Eleanor absorbed his words, struck by the private nature of the admission. "Then perhaps I shall hope for the same." The Duke's brow lifted, not with amusement but with a reluctant sort of regard. Yet before the moment could settle into something meaningful, he drew back, as though he had stepped too near the boundary he had imposed upon himself. "There will be a gathering in London next week," he informed her. "The season's early meetings. Your attendance will be expected." "I understand," she replied. "You will be introduced formally as Duchess of Ravensshire. It will invite scrutiny." "Scrutiny is inevitable," she answered softly, "but I shall bear it with composure." He inclined his head, acknowledging her courage, then turned to leave. But as he reached the doorway, Eleanor noticed something, a fine silk ribbon caught in the cuff of his coat. Pale blue. Delicate. It could only have belonged to the woman in the portrait. A quiet ache tightened her throat. Even now, he carried a token of the past. He followed her gaze and seemed to realize the presence of the ribbon. His expression flinched before hardening again. Wordlessly, he removed it, folded it, and placed it in his pocket, as though trying to hide both the object and the sentiment it betrayed. Their eyes met. Eleanor offered no judgment, only a silent understanding. For a heartbeat, something softened between them, an unspoken acknowledgment of the wounds they both now lived beside. But the moment passed. "Prepare yourself for London," he said, his voice composed once more. "The eyes of society will be upon us." When she was alone again, Eleanor exhaled deeply. The ribbon, the portrait, the flowers, each detail revealed the depth of the love he had lost. She knew then that affection would not come easily. Perhaps it would never come at all. Yet as she walked slowly back along the corridor, she felt a spark of determination burn brighter. Not to replace the past, nor to compete with it, but to exist in her own right, with strength that demanded respect rather than pity. For the first time since entering Ravensshire, she sensed the faint promise of change. Not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of something shifting in the air around them, subtle and uncertain. And though her heart still bore the sting of the Duke's rejection, she did not retreat from the challenge before her. She moved forward, knowing London awaited, with its glittering ballrooms and sharp-tongued gossip, its whispered judgments and unexpected revelations. The season would test her, but it might also reveal the first cracks in the Duke's impenetrable armor. The carriages rolled through the lamplit streets of London as twilight settled like a veil across the city, softening its harsh edges and sharpening its elegance. Eleanor sat within the Ravensshire carriage, her gloved hands resting in her lap, her breath steady despite the growing tightness in her chest. Tonight marked her formal presentation as Duchess, a night of scrutiny, whispered appraisals, and the unyielding gaze of the ton. Across from her, the Duke sat composed, his posture impeccable, his expression unreadable as ever. Yet something in the quiet between them felt altered, as though the fragile understanding they had shared in the conservatory lingered like a faint perfume neither dared acknowledge. When they arrived at Lord and Lady Ferncombe's grand ball, the air shimmered with candlelight and the hum of polite conversation. The facade was nothing new to Eleanor. She had attended such gatherings before. But this evening, stepping through the towering doorway on the Duke's arm, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes settle upon her with an intensity she had never experienced. The soft rustle of silk, the glitter of chandeliers, the subtle scent of roses and warmed beeswax, all combined into a world both dazzling and suffocating. "She is very young," someone whispered. "Pretty enough, though hardly extraordinary." He does not look at her. Not once. A marriage of convenience, clearly. Every comment drifted toward Eleanor like a passing draught, light yet cutting. She kept her chin lifted, her expression serene, but she felt the Duke tense subtly at her side. He did not defend her aloud, but the faint tightening of his grip on her arm suggested he heard every word. Lady Ferncombe approached at once, her smile gracious. "Your Grace, we are honored," she said warmly, though her eyes, like those of many others, studied Eleanor with curious calculation. "We rarely have the pleasure of welcoming a new duchess." Eleanor replied with polite gratitude, her tone steady despite the storm within. She sensed the Duke's gaze on her, evaluating her poise. When he finally spoke, his voice held quiet authority. "My wife has shown remarkable fortitude since arriving at Ravensshire," he said. "I trust she will impress more tonight." Eleanor blinked, startled by the unexpected compliment. It was not affectionate, but it was public, pointed, and protective in a manner she had never anticipated. A murmur rippled subtly through the nearby guests, approval mixed with surprise. She stole a quick glance at him, but his attention had already shifted toward the ballroom doors. The Duke excused himself briefly to greet several political acquaintances, leaving Eleanor with Lady Ferncombe and a small circle of ladies. Their smiles were genial, but their eyes glinted with hunger for gossip. "You must find Ravensshire rather quiet," one lady remarked coyly. "And rather lonely," another added, her voice sweet yet edged. Eleanor answered with grace. "It is peaceful, yes. But its quiet offers clarity I had not expected." The ladies exchanged looks. They had hoped for insecurity, perhaps even complaint. But Eleanor gave them nothing. As the musicians began tuning their instruments for the first dance, the Duke returned. "If you will permit me," he said, offering his hand. His tone was formal, his expression reserved, but Eleanor sensed the gesture meant more than its surface suggested. To refuse him would invite scandal. To accept him placed them both in the center of the ballroom, where every eye would watch. She placed her hand in his, and together they stepped onto the polished floor. As the music swelled, the Duke guided her with controlled precision. His touch was measured, respectful, yet somehow gentler than she had anticipated. They moved in practiced circles, the candlelight catching in the Duke's dark hair and illuminating Eleanor's pale features. "You carry yourself well," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Thank you," she replied, "though I admit I feel as though I am dancing beneath a magnifying glass." "You are," he said gently, "but you manage it admirably." His praise warmed her unexpectedly, unsettling her composure. She searched his face for mockery but found none. Instead, she saw a quiet sincerity, fragile, reluctant, but real. The dance ended. Applause rose. And as they bowed to one another, Eleanor felt a flicker of something she dared not name. But the fragile moment shattered when a voice from the crowd called out softly yet audibly, "He dances with her as though she is a ghost." A ripple of awkwardness spread. The Duke's jaw tightened, and Eleanor's heartbeat stung her ribs. She forced a serene expression, though her cheeks burned. The Duke straightened, turned to the gathered crowd, and spoke with chilling clarity. "My wife," he said, "is neither a ghost nor a mere ornament. She is Duchess of Ravensshire, and I expect her to be treated with respect." The ballroom fell silent, shocked, impressed, thoroughly chastened. Eleanor felt her breath catch, not from embarrassment, but from the fierce protectiveness in his tone. It was the boldest public gesture he had offered her since their wedding. He did not look at her afterward, but the message was unmistakable. He would not tolerate her humiliation. Later in the evening, as the crowd dispersed slightly and quieter conversations blossomed, the Duke escorted Eleanor to a small alcove overlooking the gardens. The moonlight spilled through the glass, softening the sharp lines of his face. "You should not have had to endure that," he said quietly. "I have endured worse," she replied. "But your defense surprised me." He looked away for a long moment. "I do not love easily," he admitted. "I fear I may never love again. But I will not allow the world to make you small. You deserve better." His words trembled with conflict, loyalty battling grief, duty wrestling with memory. Eleanor felt a tremor of vulnerability pass through her. "I do not ask for your heart," she whispered. "Only honesty. Only the chance to exist beside you without being compared to someone I can never replace." He turned toward her, an expression of pain and revelation mingling in his eyes. "You do not replace her," he said. "You stand apart. I do not yet know what that means." Eleanor's heartbeat softened, steadying with unexpected hope. "Then let us discover it slowly." A long silence passed between them, gentle, contemplative, almost intimate. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, stripped of all the shields he usually carried. "You show a strength I had not expected," he said. "It unsettles me." "Perhaps," she replied softly, "it is meant to." The faintest curve touched his lips, not a smile, but the beginning of one. Somewhere distant, a clock chimed the late hour, signaling the end of the gathering. As they prepared to return to Ravensshire, Eleanor sensed a shift in the air between them, a fragile, flickering warmth breaking through the cold walls he had built. The Duke did not take her hand, yet he walked beside her with a nearness that felt deliberate. It was not love, not yet. But it was the quiet dawn of possibility.